right, so get this. Imagine a world where, like, you could build a tree house in your backyard, and the city, like, wouldn't be able to tell you you couldn't.
Okay.
A world where you
Good.
could trade your prized Beanie Baby collection for a used car
Interesting.
without the government taking a cut. Sounds pretty radical, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's the world economist Murray Rothbard envisioned in his book For a New Liberty. We're diving deep into anarcho-capitalism today, folks. It's a world built on pure freedom, where the only rule is don't hurt people and don't mess with their stuff.
That's the gist of it, yeah.
Okay.
Rothbard calls it the non-aggression principle, or NAP.
NAP.
And it's the foundation of his whole philosophy.
NAP, like a midday snooze, but for liberty.
I
like it. So no stealing, no punching,
Right.
no forcing your neighbor to listen to your Barry Manilow collection.
Exactly. Yeah, no forcing your neighbor to do anything they don't want to do.
Gotcha.
It's about respecting individual autonomy. Rothbard argues that this naturally stems from the idea of self-ownership. We own ourselves, our labor, and the stuff we create.
Right.
It's a fundamental human right.
See, it makes you think about all those zoning laws and regulations that dictate what we can and can't do with our own property. I mean, who hasn't been frustrated by a bureaucratic roadblock at some point? Rothbard would say that's a violation of our basic rights.
He absolutely would. Rothbard takes this idea of self-ownership and extends it to private property. If you mix your labor with unowned resources,
Right.
you own the result. Like if you clear a field and plant a crop, you own that crop because you put in the work.
So my sourdough starter is basically my intellectual property.
You got it.
But what about the argument that we need to ensure everyone has access to resources? You know, the whole enough and as good left for others idea.
Right, the Lockean proviso. Rothbard addresses that head on. He argues that the free market, powered by voluntary exchange and respect for private property, is the most effective way to allocate resources and generate wealth for everyone.
Okay, so instead of the government stepping in with regulations and wealth redistribution schemes, Rothbard's saying, let the market do its thing. It sounds almost too simple.
Well, Rothbard was a champion of Austrian economics, which emphasizes the dynamism and efficiency of free markets compared to central planning. It's like trying to plan a dinner party for 50 people where you decide every single detail. The menu, the seating chart, the music, chaos, right?
I can already see the Pinterest board spiraling out of control.
Exactly. But now imagine you let each guest bring a dish and choose where to sit. That's more like a free market. Decentralized, adaptable, and responsive to individual preferences.
So more potluck, less dictatorship. I can dig it.
Yeah.
But doesn't that lead to a ton of inequality and a potential for folks to get exploited?
It's a concern.
I mean, no safety nets, no regulations. Sounds a bit like a free-for-all.
That's a valid concern, and Rothbard tackles it head-on. He argues that government intervention, things like taxes, regulations, and even public spending, actually create more problems than they solve.
So the classic libertarian argument, government is the problem, not the solution.
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
Rothbard believed that these interventions distort the natural signals of the free market, leading to inefficiencies, waste, and less freedom for everyone. He saw it as a wrench in the gears of a perfectly good machine.
Okay, I'm starting to see the economic logic here. But what about money and banking? Surely we need some kind of central authority to manage that. I mean, I'm all for freedom, but bartering chickens for haircuts sounds a bit messy.
Rothbard would laugh at the thought of central banking. He was an outspoken critic of the Federal Reserve and its control over the money supply. Right. He believed it was the root of inflation, dreaded boom and bust cycles, and financial crises that make everyone sweat.
So no Fed, no problem. What's the alternative?
Rothbard advocated for a return to the gold standard and a free market monetary system. He argued that tying the value of money to a tangible asset like gold would bring stability and prosperity.
A world without central banks, fueled by gold and free market principles. It's bold, I'll give him that. But hold on, we've talked about the economic side of things. But what about law and order? Who keeps the peace in Rothbard's utopia? I mean, we can't all be running around like cowboys in the Wild West, right?
Now that's where things get really interesting. Rothbard envisioned a world where even essential services like law enforcement and national defense are handled by private entities,
Okay.
not the government.
Wait, private courts and security agencies.
Uh-huh.
Now that sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi novel.
It does sound a bit futuristic, yeah.
Are we talking about corporate armies and Judge Dredd roaming the streets?
It's not quite that dramatic.
So no more like government bureaucracy, I can get behind that.
Right.
But how would this whole private courts and security thing actually work?
Well,
Would we be signing contracts with different companies like we're picking cable packages?
think of it more like choosing a gym or a grocery store. You go with the one that best suits your needs and offers the best service. Rothbard believed that competition in a free market would drive private entities to be efficient and accountable.
So survival of the fittest for security companies.
In a way, yeah.
That makes sense. I guess
Yeah.
I wouldn't stick with a security company that lets someone walk off with my lawn gnome collection.
Right. You'd want to go with someone who's going to protect your property.
Exactly. But what about disputes? If my neighbor's dog keeps digging up my prize-winning petunias,
Uh-huh.
are we talking dueling lawyers at dawn?
Not necessarily dueling lawyers. Rothbard envisioned a system of private courts and arbitration services where people could choose impartial third parties to resolve their disagreements.
So less Judge Judy, more like mediation with a guy named Bob who really knows contract law.
That's a pretty good analogy.
Okay.
Yeah. The idea is to create a system that's more flexible and responsive to people's individual needs and less about, the kind of one-size-fits-all approach that you get with the government system.
Think about no more waiting months for a court date or navigating a mountain of paperwork just to settle a fender bender.
Yeah. Right.
It would be fantastic.
It would be a lot more streamlined.
Okay, so we've got private security and private courts. But what about national defense? Surely we need a powerful state to protect us from those pesky foreign invaders.
Well, Rothbard would say, hold my beer. He believed even national defense could be privatized. Imagine a system of voluntary militias and private defense organizations stepping up to protect individual liberty and property.
Okay, hold on. Private armies defending the nation.
Well, not quite armies in the traditional sense.
Okay.
More like,
Like a bunch of neighborhood watch groups with tanks.
I think it's important to remember that Rothbard was writing in a different time, and the world has changed a lot since then. But the basic principles he was advocating for are still relevant today.
Okay.
The idea that individuals and communities should have the right to defend themselves, and that the state doesn't necessarily have a monopoly on force.
Okay, so it's like a security subscription service for the entire nation.
You could think of it that way.
Intriguing, but I still have some doubts.
Sure.
What about those things we consider public goods? Roads, schools, healthcare.
Right.
Would we all be driving on dirt roads, learning from YouTube tutorials in Rothbard's world?
Rothbard was skeptical of the whole concept of public goods. He believed the private sector could handle most of these things more efficiently and effectively.
So private roads,
Right.
private schools,
Yeah.
private healthcare.
Exactly.
How does that even work? Would it be like a giant Amazon marketplace for essential services?
I think Rothbard would probably like that analogy. The idea is that in a free market, entrepreneurs would be incentivized to find ways to meet people's needs. And that includes things like education, healthcare, and transportation.
I'm starting to see the appeal. A world where you get to choose your healthcare provider, your kid's school, even the company that maintains the roads you drive on.
Right. It's about giving people more choices.
No more one-size-fits-all government solutions.
Exactly.
But what about social safety nets? It's like welfare programs, unemployment insurance, and Social Security.
Right.
Would those disappear in this stateless society?
Rothbard had strong feelings about the welfare state. He argued that government programs designed to help people actually do more harm than good, creating dependency and stifling individual initiative.
So he's saying people should be responsible for their own well-being.
Right.
And not rely on government handouts. Tough love, libertarian style.
You could say that he believed in the power of voluntary charity and mutual aid. He thought a thriving free market combined with individual generosity would be a more compassionate and effective way to help those in need.
I'm starting to see the logic here. But wouldn't a society without any safety nets be incredibly harsh?
It's a valid concern.
Especially for the most vulnerable.
It's a question that a lot of people have about Rothbard's ideas.
So we've covered economics, law and order, national defense, even social welfare.
Right.
Is there anything Rothbard thought the government should be involved in?
Right. You could say Rothbard's entire philosophy was about minimizing the role of the state and maximizing individual liberty. He believed that the market, driven by individual creativity and a desire for a better life, was far more capable of meeting people's needs than any government program.
This is definitely a radical vision and a far cry from how things work today. But is a stateless society really feasible in the real world?
That's the million-dollar question.
I mean, it's one thing to theorize about it, but could it actually work?
Well, Rothbard's work is more about challenging our assumptions about the role of government than providing a detailed blueprint for a utopian society.
It's making me think differently about the relationship between individuals and the state, that's for sure.
That's good. That's what he wanted people to do.
But before we get too carried away with this anarcho-capitalist dream, let's take a moment to explore how Rothbard's ideas are relevant today and address some of the criticisms of his work.
Hey there, listeners. If you're finding value in our deep dives and want to dig even deeper, consider grabbing a copy through the Amazon link in the description below. And if you're an audiobook fan, you can dive in with a free 2-month Audible trial on us. Our gift to you. It's a great way to support the channel, explore amazing works on the go, and immerse yourself in these thought-provoking ideas. So, check out those links in the description, and thank you for supporting our work. And we'll keep the deep dives coming.
Ready for round 3?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've spent a good chunk of time in Rothbard's world of like zero government and maximum freedom.
Maximum freedom. Yeah.
It's definitely given us a lot to chew on.
It's a lot to think about.
But let's be real, how much of this stuff actually applies to the world we live in today? Is this just some ivory tower thought experiment, or are Rothbard's ideas actually relevant to the 21st century?
Well, you might be surprised how much Rothbard's ideas resonate with current events.
Really?
Yeah.
Like what?
Think about the growing concern over government surveillance. People are increasingly worried about Big Brother watching their every move. Rothbard saw this coming from a mile away.
He did.
He argued that government, by its nature, is a threat to individual privacy and liberty.
Okay, so he was
way ahead of his time on that one.
Yeah, and it's not just surveillance. Look at the debates raging over military interventions overseas.
Exactly.
Rothbard was a staunch anti-war advocate. He believed that war is always a failure of the state and that it inevitably leads to a loss of freedom and prosperity.
The ultimate form of government coercion.
Right. And then there's the constant back and forth over economic regulation. Rothbard would argue that most regulations are just thinly veiled attempts by special interests to stifle competition and protect their own turf.
That's right.
So Rothbard's basically saying, get the government out of our lives and let us make our own choices.
I think that's a pretty good summary of his philosophy.
It's interesting how some of these ideas, once considered fringe, are gaining traction in the mainstream.
Yeah, they're definitely becoming more mainstream.
Look at the rise of cryptocurrency and decentralized finance.
Exactly.
It's like Rothbard's vision of a world without central banks is starting to materialize right before our eyes.
It's pretty amazing to see.
Okay, but let's address the elephant in the room.
Sure.
Rothbard's ideas are...
They are definitely controversial.
He's been accused of being naive, unrealistic, even dangerous.
Right.
What are some of the main criticisms leveled at his work?
One of the biggest criticisms is that a stateless society is simply not feasible. Critics argue that without a strong central authority, society would descend into chaos.
Right.
They worry about things like private security agencies becoming too powerful or powerful individuals exploiting the weak.
Right. So like basically turning into a Mad Max free-for-all.
That's the fear, yeah.
How would Rothbard respond to that?
Well, Rothbard would argue that competition in a free market would actually act as a check on the power of any single entity. He believed that the profit motive, combined with the threat of reputational damage, would incentivize individuals and organizations to act in a just and ethical manner.
So instead of a government monopoly on force, you have a system where multiple players have to compete for business and maintain a good reputation to survive.
That's the idea.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, but what about things like environmental protection or providing for those who are truly unable to care for themselves?
That's a good question.
Wouldn't those fall by the wayside in a stateless society?
Well, Rothbard believed that environmental problems are often exacerbated by government interventions,
Okay.
and that private property rights and market mechanisms can actually be more effective tools for conservation.
So basically, let the free market handle it.
That was his view.
And what about caring for the less fortunate?
Rothbard believed that voluntary charity and mutual aid societies would be more compassionate and efficient than government welfare programs.
Sounds like he had an answer for everything.
He was a very thorough thinker.
He was a prolific writer and thinker, and he addressed a wide range of issues in his work.
Absolutely.
But it's important to remember that he was ultimately presenting a framework for thinking about the world, not a detailed policy roadmap.
Right.
This whole deep dive into anarcho-capitalism has been a real mind-bender.
It's definitely a thought-provoking topic.
It's forced us to question our assumptions about the role of government and the nature of freedom.
That's what Rothbard wanted people to do.
If you're intrigued by Rothbard's radical vision and want to explore his ideas in more depth, you can purchase For a New Liberty using the link in the description below.
It's a great book.
Trust me, it's a wild ride.
Yeah, you won't be disappointed.
And don't forget to like and subscribe for more insightful explorations of complex topics.
We'll see you next time.